Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. In this video, we're going to talk about Uranus in Taurus. Now, the idea for this video came from actually a request from one of you, from one of the subscribers, who made a comment on, I believe it was the video I did on the Biden inauguration recently, requesting to learn more about Uranus in Taurus. And as it happens, I am in the process of working on a longer video on the Uranus-Saturn square that is going to be the major configuration for us in 2021. So it made sense. I've already been working on some of the elements for that video that focus on Uranus and Taurus. So I thought it would be a great idea, maybe as sort of a primer for that more deep dive video. Let's take a look at Uranus and Taurus. And it's just in keeping with, what I've promised and I'm committed to doing with this channel. I want to be responsive to you guys. It's why I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, which a lot of you have in the last few weeks. I'm really grateful for that and encouraged by a lot of your encouraging comments saying that the content is really helpful. That's really, it really warms my heart to hear that. I'm glad to hear it's landing. And as I've committed to you, I want to be responsive to hearing what is working for you, what you guys want to learn more about, because that is my mission with this channel. I want to share my insights on this, sacred art and science of astrology to help you navigate your life, your relationships, your careers, your understanding of the world and how it's unfolding for us right now. I think it's a super critical time for all of us. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and you'll know when I'm releasing some new information, new content. A lot of stuff in the pipeline, so I'm really excited to share with you. But this is a good time to let's dive into Uranus and Taurus. And I've got some slides prepared. Let me pull up my keynote here. Let's just jump right in and talk about Uranus in Taurus. And as you can see here, what we have with Uranus and Taurus, Uranus spends 7 years in every sign of the zodiac. So Uranus will be moving through the sign of Taurus for 7 years. It went in 2018. It'll be in the sign through 2025. And here we just have a picture of the actual planet Uranus. It's really quite beautiful. This rich blue color. Really, I just resonate with it. I have Uranus strongly configured in my chart, so I have a very strong Uranian connection, if you will. And then we have the bull, the symbol of the sign of Taurus. So, as I said, we've got 7 years that's going to move through this sign. And we're going to take a look at some of the characteristics of both Uranus and Taurus and see what we can expect from this archetypal combination as we spend 7 years exploring this combination of this planet in this sign. So let's talk about Uranus first. And let me just pull this out so you can see some of the qualities of Uranus, right? And there's some imagery to sort of support what we might relate and associate with the sign of Uranus, right? James Dean from Rebel Without a Cause, right? Uranus is a very rebellious archetype. It can be a rebel without a cause. I think it's more appropriately a rebel with a cause, which is why the myth of Prometheus is often associated with Uranus, right? He stole fire from the gods, a very rebellious act in order to enlighten humanity. He was a rebel with a cause. So and he was punished for that by the gods. But it's a great myth, right? When we talk about anything that is Promethean, we often associate it with Uranus. And one of the great astrologers, Richard Tarnas, in his book Cosmos and Psyche, makes this connection explicit. And I think it's a really valuable framing for us to understand Uranus in terms of the myth of Prometheus. And then also here the picture of the Fool from the tarot deck. The Fool is associated with Uranus, right? And you think about, you know, in the imagery of this card, the Fool is apparently about to walk off a cliff into the abyss, right? But he's not afraid. He's going with this confident stride into the unknown, right? The abyss of the unknown. He's about to start a new journey through the tarot, and this is the initiatory card of the entire major arcana. So Uranus is that liberating effect of the Fool who is going into the unknown to grow, to mature, to evolve. So that's why we often hear the sign, or I should say the planet, associated with this tarot card. Now, a few things that we consider when looking at any planet is it is going to be more comfortable in certain signs of the zodiac than others. Most comfortable is in the sign that the planet is said to rule. It's what we call domicile. So Uranus rules Aquarius and actually co-rules it with Saturn, which is the traditional ruler. Uranus is considered the modern ruler of Aquarius. And this makes a lot of sense if we consider the qualities that we associate with the sign of Aquarius, right? It's that freedom-loving, it's a very social planet, or sign, I should say. A lot of the qualities that we often associate with Aquarius are indeed very Uranian. So Uranus is really most at home in that sign. It can express its unique, individuating urge, if you will. The other sign where it's in exaltation, it's exalted in the sign of Scorpio, which is another sign which would support Uranus's need to really go deeper, right? Scorpio loves to get into the hidden. It loves to explore the occult, deep dives into any subject. It's not afraid of the taboo. It's not afraid to break rules, right? Uranus likes that. So it feels very at home in Scorpio in that energy. Now, you also have any planet that is in the sign opposite to its rulership is always considered to be in its detriment, right? So because Uranus rules Aquarius, if we consider the sign which is opposite Aquarius, which is Leo, well, Uranus is in detriment in Leo. And one of the ways I look at this is I think about Leo is really such a individual-focused archetype. It's focused on the self, right? It's all about me and my personal will to power. And I think with Uranus, it's more of a social and more of a collective urge, right? Being an outer planet, being focused on bigger pictures. So it feels, I think, a little restricted with Leo's energy and not able to fully express its grand plan, if you will, that higher mind, that genius that it contains, I should say. And then obviously the opposite sign of Scorpio is Taurus, and a sign opposite the exaltation, the planet is said to be in its fall. And of course, very interesting to us in this current video, we are talking about Uranus in Taurus. So the first bit of interesting insight we should get is Uranus is in its fall in Taurus. This is not a sign that it's super comfortable moving through. And so we have to keep that in mind as we explore this combination of archetypes. Then I've got a key phrase up here, which is freedom from the known. And I want to give credit on that. I love that phrase. It's actually the subtitle of Jeff Green's book on Uranus, Freedom from the Known. And, you know, in my personal library of astrology books, I have at least one or two books for every planet. And I have that go-to book when I really need to dive deep into a planet. I'll just open and refer to that book and really help me to to re-engage with some of the concepts associated with it. And this is definitely my go-to book on Uranus. Jeff Green, I think, is one of the great astrologers of the late 20th century. He's credited with sort of creating evolutionary astrology. I think along with him and Stephen Forrest, both were sort of the progenitors of this way of looking at the birth chart from a evolutionary perspective. It certainly has had a huge impact on my study of astrology, my practice of astrology. So I'm a huge fan and owe a great debt of gratitude to Jeff Green, who unfortunately passed away several years ago. But I just want to read you the opening to this book on Uranus, Freedom from the Known. And just to set the tone for what we're talking about with Uranus here. He says, Uranus correlates to individuation, liberation, freedom, and deconditioning. Deconditioning from what? Deconditioning from Saturn. Saturn correlates to all the conditioning patterns in your life, including the conditioning patterns of society and family, the expectations of people in your life, and the conditioning patterns relative to all the prior lives you bring into this life. All of these patterns condition your sense of identity at any moment in time. Uranus, clearly, is an antithetical archetype to Saturn. This means that Uranus is forever trying to shatter, revolutionize, liberate, or break free from all those conditioning patterns. What for? What is the intent? To what purpose? If you shatter all the conditioning patterns that define your sense of personality and identity, then you can, at some point, arrive at your essential nature and identity that is unconditioned. Obviously, that can be a fairly long journey. So, really important to get a sense of Uranus in relationship to Saturn. It's really part of the identity of Uranus, as Jeff presents it here, that it is deconditioning us from the conditioning pattern of Saturn. And I think this is a really important thing for us to wrap our brains around when we consider Uranus. And as I'm saying, we're preparing this for a video on Uranus and Saturn, this square aspect that they're going to be in for the entirety of 2021 and into 2022. This is really a dynamic that we are really going to be forced to integrate into our lives over the coming year. So I'm going to take a look at, I'm going to bring up a view of the solar system. And I think this is really interesting, and I love doing this because I always want to bring in a sense of the real sky that we're talking about here. Astrology can be a little abstract. We're sort of bringing it down to this concepts of archetypes, but it's really talking about what's really going on in our solar system on a planetary level. So if we consider, where we are on Earth amongst what we call the inner planets, right? Inside this asteroid belt, we have Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And it's a nice, comfortable zone of the solar system. It's why all the inner planets tend to represent very personal, intimate factors in our lives. But as we start to zoom out into the solar system, we got to get beyond the asteroid belt to get to Jupiter, right? And then to Saturn, right? What we see is these two planets kind of are in their own zone, if you will, which is why they are related to the social factors in astrology, where the inner planets tend to be more personal. Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets, right? And it's important to note that Saturn is the last planet that we can see with our naked eye in the sky. And so for thousands of years, since the beginning of Western civilization and the birth of astrology itself, Saturn was considered the boundary of the known solar system, which is why it is the lord of boundaries, right? This orbit of Saturn really is a certain boundary to our personal and social experience of the solar system. It wasn't until the invention of telescopes and in the 1700s when we started to be able to look beyond Saturn and discover that there were planets beyond, which is when we discovered Uranus. And then later in the 1800s, we discovered Neptune, and in the 1900s, we got Pluto. And now in the 20th century, we're going beyond these trans-Neptunians. We've got Eris and Haumea and Makemake. But our world has expanded, right? Our concept, our consciousness has grown over the years, and we've had to incorporate these outer planets into our cosmology. And so it's very interesting what we're talking about here, this relationship between Uranus and Saturn, right? Because if we consider Saturn to be the lord of the boundary, of limits, of the conditioning patterns of our family, of our society, of our relationships, here Uranus then represents a freedom from that conditioning, a freedom from those restrictions of letting in the unknown, right? So this is a really fascinating relationship that we can consider in terms of Uranus's energy and what we'll be dealing with throughout the year of 2021, because these two planets are in a square configuration. And let me explain that. And this is a good time that we can take a look at that, because let's go in and of course, always reminding you that astrology is what's called geocentric, right? It's considering the solar system from the perspective, from the experience of being on Earth. What does the sky look like from our perspective on Earth? And of course, right now we're in this very powerful period, right? Because if we look to this portion of the sky, which is Capricorn and Aquarius out here, we can see that the Sun and Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn are all in Aquarius, lining up, right? We've got Pluto over here in Capricorn. Venus is making its way into Aquarius. So this is kind of what astrology is trying to demonstrate for us, right? That, and we could go to an actual chart and see, well, here, if I put the sun up as well, what we just saw over there is all of these planets in Aquarius. We see Venus over here as well, right? That's representing all of these parts of the sky, these actual bodies in motion, right? And then we can also look here over in this part of the sky. We've got Mars and Uranus in what is known as Taurus, right? And they're in a conjunction. From our perspective here on Earth, if we look out, Mars and Uranus are aligned. And this is why conjunctions are so powerful, right? The energy of Uranus coming through Mars to us on Earth, they're combining their forces in a very powerful way. And we're experiencing that in a super intensity, because Mars is a very intense planet. It intensifies whatever it touches. So getting Uranus's rather revolutionary energy funneled through Mars to us on Earth, really, that's impactful. That's a time period when both of those forces are amplified. They're mutually amplifying each other. And then we're getting, from this portion of the sky, well, we've got Jupiter and Saturn, which have been conjunct. They're starting to separate a little bit, but we can still see they're both sending their energy from that part of the sky to the Earth. Okay, and what we have and what we are going to be experiencing during this whole year, really, is this square energy, right? And if we look what Saturn is doing, Saturn is coming at us from over here in Aquarius, and we've got Uranus coming to us from over here in Taurus. These are at a 90-degree angle to each other, right? This is what a square aspect is all about, right? And so we're getting this, we're having to incorporate both of these energies simultaneously, and anything that's at a square aspect, it's challenging. It has to be integrated, right? Adding to this fact that we have Mars also coming from that angle, we've got Jupiter coming in from this angle. This is a real indication of why This month has been super intense, and is why we talked about the first month of the year of 2021 is likely to be the most intense because of this configuration. And this is going to subside a little bit as we move through the year. Once we get through February and into March, I anticipate a little of the energy to be a little more diffuse for us moving forward. But this configuration is really a big part of what we're experiencing. It started on the New Year's Day. This configuration really started to come into effect on the 6th, on the 20th. Some important dates in our history we will be talking about for years to come. Astrologically speaking, we can understand why some of these things occurred in the way that they did. So, just a sense of this is what we're seeing now in the chart. Astrology brings that down to a two-dimensional flat surface and tries to show us what's going on in the sky. There is Uranus and Mars conjunct in Taurus and in this square aspect with all these planets up here in Aquarius. And what we consider is like in a zodiac chart, Earth is sort of the middle of the chart. So in a lot of ways. So metaphorically speaking, it's our perspective. This wheel around Earth is sort of giving us a sense of the sky around Earth, right? If you look at this square, and you can see that these two planets are in a square aspect from us here on Earth, right? We could say that this is a square to that. So hopefully that's helpful. It'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about planets moving through certain signs and then planets in aspect to each other. So let's pivot back to Mars, or I'm sorry, to Uranus in Taurus. I'm going to bring my keynote back up here. So jumping back, so now we get a sense of, okay, here's some of the characteristics of Uranus. Now, next I want to bring up is one of the things that you'll learn about me if you subscribe to this channel, and you'll see my videos. I love word clouds. I love making them. I love meditating on them. And I think they're an incredibly useful tool for helping us to understand the archetypes of astrology, the archetypal nature of the planets and the signs in particular, because what we learn about them is these archetypes are complex. They're multifaceted, from like a multifaceted jewel, right? We can see, depending on what angle and what light is reflecting, we get reflected back different qualities, different characteristics. And of course, any light source is also going to create a shadow, right? And every one of these archetypes certainly also constellates its shadow side along with its more lighter or attractive attributes. And the planets and the signs are no exception. And certainly if we start to look at Uranus here, we can start to get a sense of, some of the qualities and characteristics that this archetype represents. We talked about the unknown and liberation. Obviously, it rules Aquarius, right? It's this very revolutionary outsider energy, right? It represents the genius in all of us. It's the higher mind. It's literally the higher mind of Mercury. It can be eccentric. We talked about Prometheus, right? It's a fellowship of humanity. But it also can be antisocial, right? That can seem almost contradictory in a way. It's unpredictable. It's eccentric, right? It's focused on future and technology. It's very much about science and experimentation. But it also can constellate a sense of chaos, this upheaval, right? It can be very disruptive. You think about disruption is such a big term in technology in Silicon Valley, right? I think Silicon Valley is a very Uranian place. And you can see some of the constellations of these qualities tend to represent the efforts and the ideology of Silicon Valley quite nicely. So, just start to meditate on on something like this, you really start to get a sense of what this archetype is really all about, the complexity of it, many facets of it. So sort of let's put that aside, let's hold the space for that, and now let's consider the sign of Taurus. And as we transition, one thing to focus on is that the planets tend to represent functions, right? They're more like the verbs. They're how we do what we do, right? Whereas the signs tend to be qualities, right? They're more the adjectives that describe how we do what we do. So when we consider a planet in a sign, the planet is the action, and the sign is going to say, how do we do that thing? So how do we do our Uranus reformer, rebellious, eccentric, genius energy? How is that going to manifest for us for this 7 years while the planet is moving through Taurus? Well, it's going to wear the sign of Taurus, if you will. So let's talk about Taurus then, and let's consider this sign. Now, here if you see in this badge I've created, it's the second sign of the zodiac. Its symbol is the bull, and it's fixed earth. And this is super important. It's one of the things I like to focus on whenever I talk about particularly the signs of the zodiac. And another series I'm going to be working on coming out later this year is Blueprint of the Soul, where I'm going to share with you my process of really astrology 101 of how to really understand all of these zodiac signs and archetypes. But here's what we want to do is to get what I call an elemental sort of under the hood understanding of any zodiac sign. You want to consider two factors, right? What's called its modality, its mode, and its element. And in the zodiac, we have 3 modes, which are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And we have 4 elements, which are fire, earth, air, and water. So there are 4 signs that are fixed in the zodiac, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And there are 3 signs that are earth in the zodiac, right? Which is Taurus and Virgo and Capricorn. But there is only one sign that is fixed, earth, and that is Taurus. So each sign represents one unique combination of these 2 factors. And that's a really good way of fundamentally understanding the signs of the zodiac, because it starts to really tell us something very, very fundamental about what that sign represents. So let's dive a little deeper into those 2 factors. What does it mean to be fixed? What is that mode about? Well, here's how I symbolize the idea of fixedness, is what we would consider or call centripetal force, which is a force that moves from the outside towards the center, right? It's a consolidating force. It wants to harness energy, right? It pulls it in, which is what makes all of the fixed signs of the zodiac tend to be really powerful. You think about Taurus and Scorpio and Aquarius and Leo, right? There's something very powerful about those signs. It's because energetically they are consolidating their power. They're pulling it into their center and grounding it, and it has this dynamo-like quality to it. So with Taurus, you're getting fixed combined with earth, right? So you get this downward pointing triangle represents earth. Well, what is the quality of the element earth? Well, it is grounded, right? It's pointing downward. It incorporates the force of gravity, right? A downward pulling. It's all about 3D reality. It's about the senses, right? Earth signs really only trust their 5 senses, right? If I can't see it or hear it or touch it or smell it or taste it, it probably isn't real to me, right? So that's a quality of earth. Now, there's a third factor that we can always consider with every sign is what's known as polarity, which is well represented by the famous Taoist symbol of the yang-yin, right? Now, all earth signs are inherently yin. And what does that mean, right? Yin is that receptive, passive quality. It's associated with the feminine, right? And keep in mind, whenever we talk about masculine and feminine in astrology, we're not talking about biological sex or even gender distinctions. Feminine and masculine are themselves archetypes that contain qualities that in a complete way are intermingled. Every one of us has a masculine and a feminine quality, regardless of our biological sex or even our gender preferences. We all have varying degrees of yang and yin energy, and it's usually determined by the preponderance of planets in different signs, right? If we have a lot of planets in earth and water signs, which are both yang, or both yin, I should say, then we're probably going to have more yin personality. If we have a preponderance of planets in fire and air signs, you can expect a much more yang type of personality, very fiery, very air, very intellectual, right? That's the masculine, that's the outward. But it's so important to know that, contained at the heart of yin is yang. And if we had the yang symbol here, we would see that black dot in the heart of the white moving portion of the symbol. And this relates to like Jungian's idea of the anima and the animus, right? The anima is that feminine part of every male, and the animus is the masculine part of every woman. So these three factors really form the foundation of any of the zodiac signs, and it's a great way of really deeply comprehending what that sign is about, right? You know so much about it just from these three factors. Knowing that Taurus is fixed, it's earth, it's yin, this tells us everything we really need to know about the sign. Some other things to look at, we looked at how Uranus is comfortable in certain signs. Well, as a sign, certain planets are going to be more or less comfortable in Taurus. So we know that Taurus is ruled by Venus. Of course, Venus's love and sensuality is right at home in the sign of Taurus. Likewise, the moon is exalted in Taurus. The moon's watery, emotional, feminine side, its reflective nature, is really comfortable in the sign of Taurus, in a fixed earth yin sign. It goes without saying. So, Venus in Taurus, moon in Taurus are considered really good placements for those planets and anyone who has those in their zodiac. Now, of course, the opposite is true, right? So the sign opposite Taurus is Scorpio. Mars, being a co-ruler of Scorpio, is going to be in detriment in Taurus. And as we discussed on the previous slide, Uranus is in its fall in Taurus. And the key phrase for Taurus is I have. It's all about possession. It's all about value. And so let's take a look at what is constellated by Taurus. And again, we have another of my favorite word clouds. And here we see the many facets of the sign Taurus represented, right? We talk about it being fixed earth. I have, right? It has this very solid sense to it as an earth sign, right? It's all about value. It's all about, it's a very conservative sign. Earth tends to be conservative. It's associated with the materialistic, right? The three-dimensional here and now. But it's about sex. It's about survival, right? The survival of the species doesn't survive without sex, without reproduction. So those two things are often associated with Taurus. But it also can be this sense of inertia, right? It can be slow. It's slow and steady, right? Sometimes it's boring, right? It can be very stubborn, right? Taurus types tend to be very set in their ways, very slow to react, very fixed in their ways, right? But it's very enduring. It's very thorough. It's associated with the green thumb, right? Great gardeners tend to have a lot of Taurus or earth energy. So again, you start to see a constellation of qualities that are associated with the sign of Taurus. So now, what happens if we combine these two archetypes as we're experiencing them in this period of Uranus and Taurus? So let me just jump to that. And we can see now, side by side, we start to get a sense of what can we expect from these two archetypes as they blend their qualities and characteristics. Well, right away when we can see why Uranus might be in its fall in Taurus, because here we have the planet of sudden change having to move into the sign of patience and slow and steady energy. This is not an area of modality where Uranus feels like it can really do its thing. It wants to be free. It wants to be individuated, right? It's all about just this really unpredictable, radical energy. And Taurus is like, no, let's take it, slow it down. Let's be patient and have some inertia. We're very conservative, right? Uranus is liberal and Taurus is conservative. It's patient, right? We don't see anything about patience going on with Uranus, right? So there is a certain sense of an antithetical nature here that Uranus tends to get a little slowed down as it moves through Taurus. And, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe an ability to somehow ground some of this Uranian energy could be beneficial. But you can really start to play with some ideas that you might expect this configuration to present for us, right? What would we get? Could we get some sort of revolution in money, right? Are we going to get a sudden change to our survival, right? And I think even though, we talked a lot about the configuration of Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn really being indicators of what we experienced in 2020 and the coronavirus and the lockdown. And they certainly did contribute to the tone and tenor of that whole, and we're still kind of experiencing, right? But I think we can also start to see this effect of Uranus and Taurus in what we've witnessed and experienced through the coronavirus and the pandemic, right? Start to look again at some of these qualities, right? A sudden change into our survival and our sense of domestication being disrupted, an upheaval into our routines, right? This really starts to show you that Uranus and Taurus is showing itself in some of the things that we're experiencing in our world. And so it can give us a guide as to how we might work with this energy in a much more proactive and positive way. What are some of the characteristics that we want to demonstrate through the combination of these archetypes that could be much more positive, right? How can we be more inventive in our routines, right? Can we have a revolution in sex? Maybe so, right? There's a lot of ways we can start to look at how these archetypes can combine in interesting ways for good or for ill. And it just, again, it arms us. This is always one of my big salient points of astrology. Arms us with the information. Once we're conscious of what's going on, then we can put that information to work for us. And again, it's important to know, where are these things showing up for you personally in your birth chart? Where is Taurus for you? What planets do you have in Taurus in your natal chart? That's going to be really important to understanding for you personally how these energies are going to affect you and how you can use them, which this is why I'm always encouraging you, if you haven't already, to get a reading of your chart, to study your chart, to know it, because that's your blueprint. That's how we navigate these challenging times together and how we each individually participate in what's unfolding. So, as I've said in many videos, I'll say it again, I'm taking clients. I'm starting to open up my appointment book. I've already got February and March, I think, opened. So if you're interested, check the information in the link below. You can contact me on my website, astrolab21.com, book an appointment. I would love to help you if you're interested. Learn to use your own birth chart as the blueprint of your soul and help you become the architect of your own destiny. Okay, so back to the slideshow. So there's a couple of things I want to focus on that I think are going to be really important and sort of come to the fore during certainly this year and over the course of this whole 7-year period. But this is another slide I'm working on for this Uranus square Saturn video I'm working on, but it's appropriate here too. Because as I've said in other videos, money is going to be a huge factor here, right? We know that Taurus lose money in what's of value in our possessions, and that Uranus wants to revolutionize and change in a technological way. And I think that combination is something I'm looking at very closely in society. Now, one of the things that has been getting a lot of publicity of late is cryptocurrency, right? I mean, Bitcoin has gone through the roof over the course of the last year. And all of the cryptocurrencies are of great interest right now. And I think it is something that is very Uranus and Taurus. Like this era, this will be the make or break era for crypto. And I think it could go one of two ways. I mean, either, is there a future where crypto or Bitcoin becomes the new dollar? I think it's possible, right? But there are a lot of forces aligned against that because I don't have a picture up here of like the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve is not super happy about cryptocurrency because it can't control crypto. The Federal Reserve is a hierarchical banking system that is top down and that really controls the monetary supply around the world. And it's been, I think it was founded in 1913, if I'm not mistaken. So it's almost 100 years. And basically it's a private bank. It's a collection of private banks. It is not federal. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express, right? It's private. And it basically has got the exclusive right to print money for the government at interest, which means it creates money from nothing, from thin air, pure profit. It's fractional reserve banking. If you're interested in this stuff, just Google fractional reserve banking and you'll be surprised. So this is how currency is introduced into the financial markets, into the world. It's through fractional reserve banking and through the Federal Reserve. What crypto is trying to do is to circumvent that system and create a new way of creating value, of creating wealth that is based on a different system. Because, what's really interesting to me about cryptocurrency is not so much the currency itself, it's the technology that underlies it, which is blockchain. That to me is the super Uranian technology that I think holds great promise for the future and could really revolutionize our value. Uranus and Taurus, we could really describe this as a revolution in values, a revaluing of what we hold dear. And how do we quantify that which we value? Well, we use money. We use money as the means of exchange of things that we value and want to possess. Taurus, right? So this is going to be a real interesting battle, I think. It's already starting. Interestingly, if you look at Biden's nominee for Treasury Secretary is former chairwoman of the Fed, Janet Yellen. And she came out in her first statement, I believe, as the nominee, and was attacking cryptocurrency and basically saying that it's a platform for crime syndicates and terrorists and that we should limit it and control it. Okay? Janet Yellen, former chairwoman spokeswoman of the Federal Reserve, the private bank that does not want you to have money in your own hands, that does not want to lose control over incredible resources, right? They've been printing trillions of dollars at interest. They're going to make money no matter what, right? And so it's a really interesting thing. And I think one of the unfortunate things about cryptocurrency is that it's really been co-opted by the stock market, by Wall Street. It's become another speculative investment bubble, which is why we've seen this crazy rise in the value of these cryptos. My hope is that we'll find, and I think to me Ethereum represents a different sort of ethos. I think it's more committed to what the promise of blockchain presents than Bitcoin is. That's just my personal opinion on it, but I'm interested to see how this plays out because I feel like this is going to be a real battle, and we are going to expect Wall Street. Where we are clearly in a bubble, right? Anyone who doesn't see that is in total denial. The economy is not doing well, and we have a stock market at an all-time high. There is a decoupling going on, and I just love this image, this statue of the girl staring down the bull of Wall Street, right? And what is the symbol of Taurus? The bull, right? Money, resources, wealth, right? And this symbol really came out of the last period, which was Uranus in Aries, which was really the impetus behind the Occupy Wall Street movement. It was the impetus behind the Arab Spring and the revolutionary spirit that sort of circumnavigated the globe in 2010, 2011, 2012, when Uranus had moved into the sign of Aries. And now that it's in Taurus, that all came and went, and there was a lot of revolution, there's a lot of protest, but nothing really changed, right? We bailed out the banks, and the CEOs of all of those investment banks got their $1 million bonuses. No one went to jail. No one was punished for essentially crippling the global economy. And no reform was instituted to stop it in the future. So now, if you've studied what's going on, what was the big thing back in 2008? It was what they called CDOs, these collateralized debt obligations, where they packaged mortgages and sold them as investments, and they were crap, and they were just a facade. It's a pyramid scheme. And now what are they doing? Well, the newest trend over the last 4 or 5 years, they've done the same thing with business loans. They've taken business loans and packaged them as investments and sold them in the market. Billions and now probably trillions of dollars. Well, and the thinking was, hey, businesses are really stable. They always pay back their loans on time. This is a really safe investment. Well, how many businesses are going to go under as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? We haven't even seen it yet, but hundreds and thousands of businesses are not going to survive this pandemic, which means they're not going to pay back their loans, which means we have another massive debt crisis looming. And they know it's coming. And this was happening before COVID-19. If you look in December of 2019, the Fed did another giant, what they call quantitative easing, right? They injected, I don't know, it was like $500 billion or close to $1 trillion into the economy because the banks were seizing up again. Liquidity had failed. It was about to have another 2008. So I think 2021 is going to see a huge adjustment to the stock market. And in the video I'm working on Uranus and Saturn, I'm going to give some more specific dates where I think we should really pay attention to when those squares come into exactitude over the course of the year. But this is just something I want everyone to sort of keep an eye on, especially if you're interested in this space, because they're going to introduce digital currency. There's an effort to really obsolesce cash altogether, right? And this is big tech. It's just all kinds of forms of technology interfacing in what we value. And I just threw this up here because this has this sort of Banksian quality that I love. Just this simple stencil of, buy more stuff, right? And I think we're being called, Uranus and Taurus, a revolution in values. And I think a lot of the assumptions of our capitalistic way of living are really going to be coming under incredible scrutiny over this period. Nothing again. I think capitalism has given us a lot of good, but I think it also has some negatives and some downsides that need to be addressed. We've been promised that we can buy our way into happiness for decades, and we have more stuff than ever, and it gets delivered to our door next day by Amazon. Yet we're as depressed and miserable as ever. Something's got to give. So this is one area I think Uranus and Taurus is going to have a big factor. The other one I want to look at is these two competing ideas, which are also very Uranus and Taurus, which is this idea of a great reset versus the Green New Deal. Right? And I have the two sort of poster children for these two movements. One is AOC, who has been associated with the Green New Deal, and the other is this guy Klaus Schwab, who is the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, which is essentially the billionaires club. It's they host their summit in Davos every year. That name may sound familiar to you. And he wrote a book during 2020 called The Great Reset, where he is essentially advocating for this, under the banner of let no good disaster go to waste. He's proposing a great reset. This is his Time magazine, which was recently bought by another billionaire, interestingly enough. And this is proposing a sort of, it's assuming some of the language of the Green New Deal. It's this green revolution that we're going to have better living through technology. And it's being presented, and we were going to see a lot more talk about that over the course of the next year or two. The other thing will be the Green New Deal, which is not going away, even though I think with the recent Biden administration coming into power and promising a more central ruling from the center, and I think they're really trying to marginalize the left. I don't think the left is going away. I think you're going to see more of some of the movements that we saw coalesce in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, with social justice, with Me Too. I think there's going to be a giant coalition on the left that's going to keep pressure on the Democratic Party and the administration in general. But this is a real interesting battle that I think will play out, that has a lot of these Uranus and Taurus themes, because Taurus is about our natural resources. It's about the planet Earth, right? It's an Earth sign. And we are facing some really certain environmental crises. And time's running out on what to do. And I think a lot of us sense and feel that need for some big social changes. And I said this in my video about the Biden inauguration. I think that configuration that I showed you has a lot of characteristics that could be sort of FDR New Deal scale measures that could be implemented. And I think that's what's being called for. And what we want to observe is, are we going to do a Green New Deal, which is more, and this gets into what I want to talk about in the next video, which is Saturn and Aquarius. Because Aquarius is about grassroots, bottom-up, egalitarian, peer-to-peer, right? It has elements of crypto and blockchain and the Green New Deal versus old world monetary policy and a new world order run by billionaires, which want to keep the same system in place of extractive wealth, but put a green face on it. That's just my 2 cents. I think there's a lot of good proposals probably coming from that side of the argument, but I'm very skeptical. And I think you want to be very critical of some of those proposals. Some form of hybrid of these two would probably be ideal. You know, it's so interesting that they've used this classic Soviet poster style to represent the Green New Deal. I guess they're really leaning into the socialist agenda with this. Not sure that's their best PR strategy, but you know, it's just very interesting where this is just very technocratic. Like, we can literally build a scaffolding and we can use technology to create a transhumanist, perfect utopian society. It's just interesting to see this is how I think astrology helps you to see things in terms of the symbolism. And it gives us, like what I've always talked about, this perspective. We can step back and go, okay, what's really going on here? So, two things to really look at in terms of Uranus and Taurus. Like I said, this is just really a primer on another video that I have in process, which is looking at Uranus square Saturn. And when we bring those two archetypes together, we're bringing two planets and two zodiac signs in a way that I really is going to give us a lot more specificity about what this energy is going to constellate, to bring out. And again, this will play out in the collective. We're going to see it in society, and we're going to feel it personally. And hopefully we can articulate how to best absorb these energies, to work with these energies, right? It's all energy. It's energy patterns. And that's what astrology is. It's pattern recognition. And it's seeing these cycles play out, and it's knowing what's going on, and it's giving us an ability to be agile, to flow with the energies, rather than have them just overwhelm us because we don't know, right? It's this great dichotomy I've always thought about between fate and destiny, right? Fate is what happens to you when you don't know what's coming, when it's unconscious. Destiny is when you consciously work with the energies and have a direction and have a focus and have an intent. And that's what I want astrology to be for all of us. I want it to, as you know, my tagline, become the architect of your own destiny. So, all right, that's going to do it for this video. I hope that's helpful. I hope that's answered some of the questions that you guys had in the comments on some of the previous videos. And as I said, this will be a nice primer for the next video that I'm going to be putting out hopefully by the end of next week. It's a little more involved, so I'm taking a little more time to put it together. But that's going to help us really navigate really what I think is the major theme of 2021. This Uranus square Saturn configuration that will be, you know, it'll have its challenges, but I think has some opportunities for some real growth, some real development. Yeah, so that's it for now. Thanks for watching. As always, I value and appreciate your time and your attention. I know your time is valuable, and I'm honored that you choose to spend it here with me as we learn to navigate these interesting times that we're living through. All right, we'll see you next time. Sat Nam, everyone.